Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me, and thank you for rejoining us. I'm sorry that we had technical problems in the last hour or so, but again, yeah, we hopefully do that as a separate session. I'd like to welcome you all to the Creating Viable Sporting Heritage Research Partnerships session, and I'll introduce our panellists in just a moment. Just a bit of housekeeping for you. So Jo Boardman will be managing the chat and the tech for this session. So if you've got any questions, comments, or examples of your work, if you can put them in the chat box, and we'll try and get to them when our speakers have presented, and we'll try and answer as many as we can. And then if there's anything we don't get to or that requires a more detailed answer, we'll pass it to the appropriate panel member after the session. So I'd like to welcome back Vicky Hope Walker, who was speaking earlier today. Vicky Hope Walker is the CEO for the National Paralympic Heritage Trust, which she established in 2015. Her background spans both the museums and art sector, often bringing the two of those together. She's worked across local government, national museums, and also been a freelancer. And exhibitions, learning, and accessibility are her specialist areas. And then I'm delighted to welcome Raf Nicholson, who's a senior lecturer in sport and sustainability at Bournemouth University. Her research focuses on the history of women's sport, particularly women's cricket, and she also published her first book, Ladies and Lords, A History of Women's Cricket in Britain, quite recently. She's also a freelance cricket journalist and has written for The Guardian and ESPN Cricinfo. So welcome to both of you, and I think Vicky's going to begin this afternoon session, so over to Vicky.
Lovely, thank you, and great to be back again. I'm just going in to share my screen now. Brilliant. Hopefully you can all see that. Has it gone into a slideshow for you yet?
We can see your slides, but not into a full slideshow.
Right, let's try again. There we go. Brilliant. Thank you for the introduction, Verity. I'm just going to take you through my thoughts as a small museum on what a good partnership should look like, research partnership should look like. For those of you who are on earlier, forgive me, I will do a brief introduction on the Trust. The Trust was formed in 2015, the National Paralympic Heritage Trust. And since we became kind of active with funding from the National Heritage Lottery Fund, we have been beginning to catalogue a lot of the collections going back to the 1940s. We have had exhibitions in Norwich, in Gunnersbury, in Bradford and Keighley, and we have completed a permanent display at Stoke Mandeville Stadium just over a year and a half ago, and the National Spinal Injury Centre displays that were completed in March but never actually officially opened. We have a website that is pretty much a kind of museum in its own right, and a really exciting learning and engagement programme as well. But this talk is obviously about research. As a new trust, we are just entering into our very first accreditation process. And that's really important to us in terms of research and having those relationships. So we have got 2 PhD programs set up, and I see it very much as a symbiotic relationship between the university, the student, and ourselves. Our first one is with Glasgow University, and our PhD student is Sam Brady, and he is doing the history of the sports wheelchair and started that off a year ago. Our second one is with De Montfort University, part of the Midlands 4 Cities Partnership. And the PhD student there is Dawn Newbury, and the title is From Stoke Mandeville 1944 to London 2012, Photography in the Making of the Paralympic Community in Britain. Now, in both of these both of these partnerships, there was a conversation that took place and an introduction. I had met both Nick Watson at Glasgow and I'd met Heather at De Montfort prior to us even having a PhD idea. So I think that kind of establishing early relationships is really, really important. At the absolute core of this as a museum is there is no value in these research relationships if they don't open up debate. There is no value in our museums if they're not about debate and a safe place for debate to happen. No museum is a museum without storytelling, and that storytelling is a two-way relationship, and everyone comes at that story from a different angle with a different viewpoint. So really important to think about how is this journey, this research journey, going to create debate for us that will be inspiring, bring people in, and take us further down the road of knowledge beyond where we currently are at. The value of research, accreditation. We are at the moment in the process of going through accreditation, and actually research is incredibly important to us, especially as we have the word national in our name. But even if you aren't aiming to be a nationally styled or a national museum, it's all about kind of, you know, it helps with your professional status as well. So really, really important from that point of view. The value of research cataloguing. With both our projects, we're at the very start of being a new museum, and we've done very little cataloguing. We've done a lot of box listing, and we're getting on with our accessioning. But both of our PhDs have been put together in partnership with the universities in a way that will benefit our cataloguing. In the case of Sam, it's some of the wheelchairs we've got, but it's also what other wheelchairs might get uncovered and might end up being donated to us, or we can do a record of them and have them as part of our wider story. And with Dawn has actually worked for 20 years in the Paralympic sector, and we have thousands of photographs that are uncatalogued, and she has a lot of contacts that will help and assist as part of that cataloguing. I don't see them as sitting down there and completing all our cataloguing, but they will certainly contribute to it in a really, really valuable way. Events and exhibitions, lots and lots of opportunities to input into events and exhibitions. So with Sam, we have already set up a program of blogs. And so we've been putting those out, and they've been really popular. We've been putting them out on social media, and he's been sharing them, the university's been sharing them. So that's really great. And then with Dawn, we actually built into the research plan that we would host an exhibition at the end. And in both cases, you know, the blog is pushing Sam, and the exhibition will give a new experience and new skills to Dawn. So great symbiotic relationship going on there. PR and networks. It's really important as a museum, as you all know, to have wide networks. And how great if you're partnering up with the university. They've got a fantastic network and PR. You're partnering up with an individual with their own background and their own network. And then there's your network, and you're sharing it back with them. So it's a really wonderful tool in terms of not just network building, but also audience development as well, and getting more people on board from a variety of backgrounds, and coming from academia, personal relationships and others. So another great benefit to have. Ideas. I have already found, talking to Sam and talking to Dawn, a mass of ideas. You know, they come in with all sorts of thoughts and knowledge, and as do the universities. And so it's that whole thing, isn't it? If you give one idea away, the chances are you'll get 10 back. And I think that that's one of the great things of this sort of partnership going on. You're sharing things that really inspire you, and they are sharing things back with you, both the student and the university. So again, a really, really important element of it. So my top tips and conclusion, really: research what universities are undertaking, research relevant to your museum and collections. I had got a list, I think, of 12 universities about 2-3 years before we even kind of got into thinking that we could do a PhD. And in fact, Coventry University, there's a wonderful expert on Paralympic heritage there, Dr. Ian Britton. He has helped me with the content for our exhibitions. And he also has a great collection himself. So there's people out there doing that research. They're interested in what you're doing. You should be interested in what they're doing and looking beyond the museum that you operate. And good things will come of that. So build a network and informal partnerships. And through that, look out for funding. And you'll have these partnerships and they're looking out for funding as well. So they, as in the case of De Montfort University, they contacted me saying, look, there's some funding coming up. We'd already got to know each other. We'd already talked about ideas of working together. And this funding came up and they applied and we went for it. I also think it's really important to make your PhD students part of your team and invite them to events, meetings, social aspects of it, and to training opportunities. And really, we're a year in with Sam. I wish I'd been a bit more switched on about that right at the start, but both Sam and Dawn have attended our oral history training, because oral history is going to come into and interviewing people and getting records of those interviews. So they're now trained at the Oral History Society level, so top level, and they can draw on and use our resources for carrying out those interviews, whether it's using our Zoom or some of the specialist tools that we've paid for carrying out the interviews. And also, I think it's great for them to feel part. It can be a bit lonely, I think, doing a PhD. I don't know whether Raf would agree with that, but I think, you know, to bring them in as part of your team is nice for them to be part of another family, and they'll learn things off your volunteers. They come invited to our volunteer meetings, and vice versa. So have regular meetings, have monthly meetings, and support their programs of work through introductions to people and access to your collections, and keep very open-minded about who they might want to meet, and question them, and you know, really important in that. So we have done lots of introductions, and occasionally I might get a call from somebody. I had somebody from a PhD student in California, and I've since linked him up with Sam, because there's some areas that will cross over in their PhDs. So always bear that in mind as you're going out and meeting new people. Also keep your board of trustees up to date, and invite your students to meet your board of trustees and present at your meetings. So that's it from me. And just in conclusion, it's a really brilliant symbiotic relationship, which in some ways takes me in, you know, it gives as much to me as we might give back.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Wonderful, really clear top line points that I think everybody can take on board, and certainly a lot of that resonated with me. And having worked with some PhD students on those collaborative doctoral awards, I think those early relationships are really key to making a successful partnership. I look forward to discussing more and seeing people's questions, but we're going to move on to Raf's presentation. So over to Raf.
Okay, I'll just share my screen. Can you see that in full slideshow mode?
Yes, yeah.
Great. Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks Verity, thanks everyone for coming, and really enjoyed Vicky's presentation as well. And I hope that some of what I've got to say will actually tie in with that quite nicely. So I'm kind of coming at it from the other perspective as somebody who is an established academic and has an academic background. As Verity said, I'm a lecturer in sport and sustainability at Bournemouth University, and my research has kind of focused on the history of women's sport and specifically women's cricket. And this was the cover of the book that was mentioned briefly in the introduction, Ladies Indoors. This was published last year. So yeah, I'm kind of coming at the topic today from somebody who is an academic historian, but I've also been involved in several kind of sporting heritage projects over the course of my career to date. So I'm going to talk about a couple of those to start with, and then sort of draw out, based on that, what I think I've learned about creating good, viable sporting heritage research partnerships. So the first project took place back in 2016, and this was our Lincolnshire. So it was funded by the Arts Council and supported by Lincolnshire County Council, and it was carried out at the University of Lincoln. So it had a very strong kind of academic element. And we were sort of, it was quite a wide-ranging project looking at all kinds of heritage in Lincolnshire and exploring general attitudes to heritage in Lincolnshire. And the idea behind it, I think, was to try and engage local residents or re-engage local residents with their county's heritage. So there were numerous elements to this. There was a survey about attitudes to heritage in Lincolnshire. There was a heritage app that people could download and vote for their favourite from a range of 100 images of Lincolnshire's heritage objects. There was a performance element. There were 4 performances co-created with the public exploring Lincolnshire's heritage. And then the specific sporting heritage bit that I kind of headed up was focused on cricket. And it was a sort of case study looking at attitudes to an activity which in kind of maybe more mainstream views of heritage might not necessarily typically be regarded as heritage. So I carried out archival research into the history of cricket in Lincolnshire. I did oral histories with local players and coaches and umpires, and basically exploring how local residents relate to their cricket clubs and how the community's cricketing heritage was being maintained. So we created a website, and on that website we put lots of club histories and some of the oral history clips from the histories that we'd carried out, from the interviews that we carried out. And we also set up a Lincolnshire Cricket Hall of Fame. And overall we found, and there's a link on the screen which you can hopefully see, so you can download a free PDF copy of our overall report, of which the cricket makes up a segment. Overall, we found that cricket was felt to have an important role in trying to actually change broad attitudes to heritage in the county. And one of the key things about that was that cricket had kind of cross-generational appeal, and that we found that young people felt less strongly about authorised heritage, like museums and monuments, but they appreciated involvement in sport where they could learn kind of rules and techniques and traditions from older members. So that was our Lincolnshire. And I'm currently involved in a women's cricket kind of planning for an exhibition that was meant to open earlier this year, but has unfortunately been delayed. And we're keeping our fingers crossed that it can open in March 2021. And that is going to be held in the MCC Museum at Lord's Cricket Ground in London. And that's been a long time in the making. So the planning for that actually started in late 2017. And the key factor behind that decision to hold a women's cricket exhibition was that the MCC acquired the Women's Cricket Association archive. The Women's Cricket Association were the governing body of women's cricket in England up until the ECB took over in 1998. And they've got this great archive. There's loads of great material there. So the MCC acquired it, and it was part of a kind of broader diversification of their collection, which had traditionally been very, very focused on men's cricket and hadn't really had very much on women's cricket at all. And I was actually already familiar with the WCA, Women's Cricket Association archive, at the time that the MCC acquired it, because I'd been through it all during my PhD. At the time that I first encountered it, this is what the WCA archive looked like. So fortunately, it is in a slightly more sustainable home now, at Lord's in London. So that's a bit of a relief, but this is what it looked like when I first encountered it. So some of the collection materials from that archive that are now at Lord's and that are going to be showcased in the exhibition, some of them. So on the left, this is an extract from a tour diary written by somebody called Netta Reinberg, who was the tour manager on 2 post-war international women's cricket tours, England going to Australia and New Zealand. So there's some great, exciting insights there. There's a lovely photograph. If any of you are familiar with women's cricket, you might recognise in the top right that is a young Charlotte Edwards, who went on to captain the England team. And then in the foreground, smiling at the camera, is sadly deceased Jan Britton. So this is the 2 of them walking out in skirts to open the batting for England at Guildford in 1996. And there's a brilliant collection of photographs in the WCA archive. And there's also at the bottom right of the screen, you can see the minutes of the first ever meeting of the WCA held in 1926. And the collection at Lord's includes a full set of WCA minutes from 1926.
Oh, I think Raf's just frozen. So just do bear with us. This presentation is fascinating, and it's really great to hear that all of this stuff is coming to light now. I'm just gonna wait and see if Raf can reconnect with us. Vicky, Raf, you're back. Okay.
Sorry, I think I cut out briefly.
That's
what was the last thing? What was the last thing I said?
You were just going through that last slide with the minutes of the first meeting in 1926. So yeah, you're just highlighting some of the amazing items that are in that archive.
Okay, great. What I was just going on to talk about my role in the MCC Women's Cricket Exhibition. So I was approached by one of the museum curators to be involved from the start in 2017. And one of the first things I did was to help the curator at Lord's assemble a working party to plan the exhibition. And I was able to signpost her to other people who I knew would be really good. So former players and administrators, and that was based on the contacts and the interviews that I'd done for my own historical research. And then as a working party, we identified key players and themes and collections, as well as potential kind of lenders and donors for this exhibition. And then subsequently,
you're going to share your slides with us again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Has it gone off?
Yeah, I thought you were. I didn't know if you'd finished or were about to do that. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Okay. Sorry, technical difficulties.
We can try that again. Sorry, do bear with us, everybody. There we go. Okay, it's weird.
Okay, so can you see them now?
Yes. Yeah. So you were just on that last slide.
Okay, great. Yes. And then I was able to use my kind of historical knowledge to write a lot of the text for the different panel themes for the exhibition, based on research that I'd already done, essentially, because I'd already been through the archival material that the MCC had acquired. So overall kind of takeaways from my experiences in both those sporting heritage projects. I think the first one is about thinking big. So the Our Lincolnshire project was obviously a much wider heritage project. And I think that incorporating sporting heritage into kind of wider, particularly local heritage projects can be rewarding, can help to secure funding and yield really interesting results. And we shouldn't think of sporting heritage as completely distinctive from other aspects of heritage. Involve a wide range of people. So if we're thinking about forming partnerships, we should involve academics, yes, but also think about involving those who have kind of played or been involved in the sport for a long time. And from my perspective as an academic, it may be that you think that you already know who those people are, but often if as academics we've been doing research into a sport for a long time, then we might also know people, and we could kind of act as useful gatekeepers to those people, because we often already have established links with them. And the last point is to maybe think a little bit outside the box with regard to funding applications. And I think that this links to something that Vicky was saying, which is that if you've got a wider network of contacts who are all keen to feed into enhancing and advancing your collection, then you can all be on the lookout for these funding applications. And I guess something else is that I think it's helpful to look at it from both perspectives when we're thinking about bringing academics and sporting heritage organisations together. So if we think first of all about why should you as sporting heritage organisations work with academics, I've talked about funding a little bit, but I think that academics, sometimes we're aware of different funding streams, and we also often have the institutional support in place at our universities to help progress those funding opportunities and those funding applications, which is really important. So we've got that resource at our disposal. And one of the things that I'm actually waiting to hear on is a funding application I've made for an Arts and Humanities Research Council fellowship. So if I am successful, fingers crossed, but obviously you never know with these things, then some of that money it will go on my other research, but some of it will be siphoned into helping to support the MCC Women's Cricket exhibition. And knowledge, again, I think that this ties in nicely with what Vicky was saying earlier. Sometimes as academics, we've already done the key legwork. So I'd already been through all of the WCA archive at the time that Lords acquired it. So they didn't actually need to start kind of wading their way through it, because I could help guide them towards the key themes and the key kind of pieces and key items that we might want to think about when we were putting on the exhibition. And then from our perspective as academics, how do you convince us that we really want to work with you as sporting heritage organisations? We've got a bit of an imperative in terms of it's refable. So I'll just explain what I mean by that, because that's the thing that you hear in academia a lot and other people might not necessarily understand what I mean by that. The REF is something called the Research Excellence Framework. It takes place every 7 years, and it's how the government decides how much money to allocate to universities, basically. And one of the things that we are judged on as universities is something called impact. So it's how the extent to which the research that we do inside universities has been taken out into the outside world and has reached people and has helped people and has kind of changed real world situations. And we write things called impact case studies as part of the REF to show how our research has benefited the public or other non-academic organisations. So obviously that's a great, that's a great incentive for us to get involved with sporting heritage organisations, because often you have really good access to the public and you can help make our research much more visible. So that's great for us. And I guess as well, generally as academics, we want our research to reach the public because we feel passionately about the research that we're doing, and kind of if nobody gets to see it, then what's the point? So I definitely think that I'm always really keen to explore ways in which my research can help reach more people, and that means networking with relevant organisations like sporting heritage organisations. So just to sum up quickly then, I kind of slightly facetiously titled this presentation, "We'll Tell the Story of Your Stuff," because I think that kind of sums up the role that I see academics playing in terms of sporting heritage collections. We can provide context, we can provide key facts and figures and narratives and biographies to help you make sense of your collections and help you tell the stories that you want to tell. And just a quick plug right at the end, how do you reach academics? Well, one of the ways is through the British Society of Sports History. I am the chair at the moment of the BSSH, and our website is on the screen. It's www.sportinhistory.org. So we are a members organisation largely made up of academics, and most of us are really keen to get involved more in sporting heritage, so do feel free to contact us through the website or to drop me an email, because we've got loads of people who are working who have kind of done research and are doing research into sports history, and therefore it could be that we can help you in what you want to do as a sporting heritage organisation. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raf. That was brilliant, really insightful into cricket, particularly. For me, that was really fascinating because I'm a cricket fan. So that was a delight to hear some of the work that you're doing and have done in the past. I also should confess that I'm from Lincolnshire, so I'm quite intrigued to know about the Lincolnshire project because I wasn't aware of that. I've seen that we've got some questions that have come in, but I just wanted to kind of go back to your highlighting the Lincolnshire project. Kind of what followed on from that? Have you done that with other counties? And kind of what do you think that the legacy is from those kinds of projects, if you're using that as an example?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and I'd slightly glossed over that. I think that one of the problems with these projects actually is that question about legacy and how much it endures. The website is still in place. That's being hosted by the University of Lincoln on their web server. So I can put the link in the chat in a minute to that. Although obviously with websites, one of the things is that you have to kind of continue to maintain them. So it probably does slightly look a little bit dated now, given that that was 4 years ago. So that's one of the things that's endured. And then I think that some of the research was due to kind of feed into Lincolnshire County Council's review of local heritage collections. But again, because I was only involved in it on a short-term contractual basis, I don't know how much of it was followed up after my contract ended, I'm afraid. Sorry, that's not a particularly good answer.
That's okay. No, that's good. And if you've got any further links, do add them in the chat, and we will share everything after the conference across all of that have come out of all the sessions. So don't worry if you miss a link to something. We've had a few questions come in, and so I'm just gonna go to the top of the chat, and I think this is probably one for Vicky, but I've got a question that says, how have you managed to maintain momentum with the PhD students and their hands-on research during social distancing? So if you had issues with that, Vicky first, and then Rafe.
Zoom, I'm afraid. back to the Zoom. Yes, so we've been able to have meetings via Zoom. Certainly the oral history aspect of the work being carried out, we've set that all up via Zoom links and ability to do recordings through software that we're paying for that you download. It's also been quite interesting because lockdown suddenly made a lot of people available who had a bit of time to be interviewed or even write a little bit of their history themselves. And it has really, we've been reliant on Zoom and finding software that we can use that will record things at a high level, that is demanded by the National Archives, that sort of level, and you can do it. There are systems out there to enable you to do that. As for the students, Dawn has only just begun hers, and Sam, there was a lot of desk work that needed to be that he needed to get on with, but with our archives now back open, he can come in, and the social distancing and the COVID safe has all been put in to resume that work. It needs a bit more organisation. You can't just pop in, or, you know, there's limited number of people who can come and look at the papers. So it's a little bit more time consuming, I would say. You need to allow a bit more time to book in to do that.
And going back to pre-pandemic, just following on from that, in terms of logistics, if you've got students that are working with a university, for example, you mentioned Sam is working with the University of Glasgow, but then obviously you're at the opposite end of the country. So have you got any, I guess if you've got any advice or things that you've learned, either of you, from the logistics of managing those CDA partnerships?
Again, it's been very much having meetings over the internet in some capacity. Yes, it seemed a bit of a distance to begin with, you know, us right down almost in the south and Glasgow all the way up there. But I don't think distance is the problem. I think the main thing is to find the right university and the right student for your PhD, and the rest will follow. And Nick was introduced to me by Tom Shakespeare, broadcaster, and who is disabled himself. And he came around an exhibition of mine, and I just had a chat with him, and he said, "Oh, have you come across Nick?" And Nick had just completed a book on the history of the wheelchair. So I contacted him, we had a conversation, and later on this idea came up after we'd been donated some racing wheelchairs, and it went from there. So I don't see the distance as a barrier. Nick was the right person, Glasgow was the right university. Yeah. And we got the right student in, and I that's much more important than trying to kind of fit a square peg into a round hole elsewhere.
Yeah, certainly, because you can make it work. You know, if it's the right fit between people and an organisation, then you can make the best work, in my experience. So yeah, that's reassuring to know. I've got another question here that I'm going to direct at Raf, which is, if you could, what do you think are the key things to think about when you're planning a research project? Have you got some key top tips?
Oh, that's a great question. Key things to think about. Well, I think probably the first one is it feasible in the time that you've got available to you? So yeah, when you're doing a plan, do a kind of a Gantt chart, or just like a what are you going to do for each week, for each month, for each year of the project. So obviously for a PhD, as somebody who's done a PhD, that is basically a project in itself. So at the start, you have to kind of sit down and go, right, I think that I'm going to have, say, 3 or 4 years for this. What do I need to achieve in each of those years? So it would probably be similar. That would probably be my top tip in terms of how you manage a project. I think sometimes we want to do everything and we want to be really ambitious, but making sure that it's feasible in the time is really important.
That's good. And yeah, if you've done a PhD, then I'm sure that you are well aware of the pitfalls and what works and what doesn't work. Actually, I've got another question for you, Raf. If you're new to academia and research, what's the best way to find an academic who might want to work with a club or a museum or an archive? And perhaps Vicky can also comment on this in a minute as well.
Well, the first way is, again, I'm going to plug the British Society of Sports History. I think that if you get in touch with us, then we might well know somebody who is working on that particular area of research. We might well know somebody who we can signpost you towards, who's interested in that subject area. So that would be one way. I guess another way would be to look at so go to Google Scholar and do a search for your particular sports, and look at who's publishing in that area or who has published in that area. And if they're working at a university, then normally if you just Google their name, then their university email address will just come up and you'll be able to drop them an email. And I think that's the best way. And I do think generally as academics, we're not scary. We're really keen to engage with people. And yes, sometimes we are busy and we might take a little while to get back to you. That's like anyone, isn't it? But generally we would, I think, I can confidently say that we'd respond very favourably to requests, because there is, as I say, there is now an imperative for us in our positions to engage, to do public engagement, and for our research to reach broader audiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, from my own experience, having done a major exhibition project that also had academic advisors, definitely, yes, they are trying to tick those impact assessment boxes, but actually, are really generous and wanting to share their knowledge and expertise, and wanting to be able to translate that to be accessible for museum and heritage audiences. So I know that sometimes academics can get a bad rep amongst the museums and heritage sector, and that hasn't been the case in my experience. I've been very fortunate so far. So I hope we can continue to give that positive image and to maintain those positive relationships, because it sounds like there's a lot of great work happening out there. Vicky, I just want to bring you in on that. Have you got anything you'd like to add on to the answer to that question?
I think the only thing I'd add on to it is most of us at some point will come across somebody involved in academia, interested in our work, and talking to them. Who else have they worked with? Who else do they know? They'll have their own networks. And it was probably Ian Britton who introduced me to the work that was going on at De Montfort University. I obviously, there were some obvious universities like Bath and their Sporting Village, and Loughborough as well, that were obvious ones to kind of find out whether there were people there. But the more people you meet, ask them about their networks, because everyone has networks. And Ian had shared his work with numerous other people. They had obviously had an interest in the Paralympics, and that was the kind of start of building my network. And I mean, the other side of it is, by building that network, we got, and hopefully we'll continue to get, even if it's virtual, a lot of universities visiting us. Kind of sports science, medical students coming in. So you build up a relationship in terms of a sustainable relationship in utilising your collections with students and courses.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really key point about networks. Yeah, just you never know who you might have a conversation with. Sadly, we can't just bump into each other at conferences and networking events, but I know it's often that kind of informal stuff around the edge of an event that is where you kind of get to where you need to be. I'm just looking at the other questions. We will circulate this afterwards, but I wondered whether either of you could mention programs you've used to undertake remote oral histories. You've got names of particular programs, but we will circulate information afterwards.
Yes, I'm trying to think.
I don't know. If you can't off the top of your head, we can send that around later.
I've got one to hand. Zencastra is one of them that we're using now. And there's also, when you're doing an oral history, there's several ways that you can have that automatically transcribed as well. And I think there's a system called Renfo, but I can certainly look those up. I can certainly check those up and let you know.
Yeah, we can circulate a list.
Yep.
Those.
And obviously talk to the Oral History Society, because all of the recommendations we've got have come out of the Oral History Society.
That's great.
And they do some really good training. I mean, that might be something that would be quite nice for Sporting Heritage to do. I think it costs about £400, but I think you could have quite a few people in on that training. And that would, a lot of people could benefit from that.
That's definitely something else to think about. Is there anything you want to highlight on that, Raf, or shall I?
No, I was just going to mention the Oral History Society. I think they've actually got a web page that looks at how to do oral histories during the pandemic. They've actually got an explicit web page on that.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. We could definitely point people in the direction of that. Okay, I've got a question here from somebody who says, I've got my feet in both camps. I've just finished my MRes and I'm thinking of starting my PhD. I'm currently on a HLF funded Sporting Heritage project, but I'm just wondering how the PhD students are funded. So you can probably input into that both. Shall I come to Raf first and then Vicky?
Well, I think generally the sporting heritage ones have been linked in with the AHRC Collaborative Doctoral Awards. So Vicky's probably better placed to talk about the specifics of that than I am.
Okay.
Yes, so our one with Sam and Glasgow University is through them, and our application process was through Sporting Heritage. Our PhD with De Montfort University has come through a programme called Midlands for Cities, which is a kind of collaborative programme, and they're sharing those PhDs across 4 universities. I don't have to contribute financially to that one. I have a financial contribution to the one through Sporting Heritage, but actually it's very manageable through budgets. I put that through our travel and expensive budgets for volunteers and staff. And it works very well that way. So it's the financial contribution from our point of view is absolutely minimum. It's a time contribution from our point of view, and as a small organisation that can be difficult, but actually the benefit of this to us is so enormous that it's a priority.
Actually, I will just chime in here and say that it's not always feasible for everyone, I know, but I actually self-funded my PhD, and I think that sometimes we think that in order to do a PhD we have to have kind of full funding from a research council or from somebody, but it is possible to manage it part-time, particularly if the work that you're doing kind of in the heritage sector already complements the work that you're hoping to do with the research that you're hoping to do with your PhD, and that doing a part-time PhD can also lead in as just as good directions as doing it full-time. I actually really enjoyed doing mine part-time and kind of juggling it with various different kind of work commitments, and that was how I took up freelance women's cricket journalism, which I'm still doing on the side of my academic work. So I think that can be a possible option for some people as well.
And some of the national museums offer that to their staff as well. So that's another route in.
Yes, I'm aware that actually there are different ways to do a PhD, and there isn't a one size fits all. So that's really important to highlight those different ways in. Thank you. I'm just looking. Do you think we can ensure that research into sporting heritage becomes more diverse, both in terms of the study area and in terms of the research students who are able to become researchers, so like your PhD students? It's one that Sporting Heritage, I think, are starting to work on across all their programmes, and not just kind of getting people at the PhD stage. But do you think there are ways and means that the network can become more diverse? I will come to Raf first, because you're nodding ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just we've been having the same kind of conversations with BSSH, with British Society of Sports History, about how we can try and kind of move sports history away from its roots as being very much focused around the history of men's sport and the history of white men's sport, and there's been very little. There's been more recently done into women's sport history, actually, as is reflected, I think, in the for example, the MCC exhibition and the MCC acquisition. I think people are becoming increasingly interested in that, but I think that generally sporting history and sporting heritage do remain very white, and that is problematic. One of the things that we're looking at as BSSH is the possibility of introducing a community history award, where we offer some financial, so we offer a particular amount of money to a community history group to maybe do some oral histories or do some other form of history project within their community, and that's going to be particularly targeted at kind of Black history groups, because we think that could be one way. If we directly offer some funding for that particular strand, then that could be one way to progress, but it is a tricky one.
Yeah, definitely. And just picking up on the thing about particularly women's sport, and I know in the case for cricket, for example, the Women's World Cup 3 years ago, which the England team won, I think that had a huge amount to contribute in terms of it getting it out there and it being on terrestrial TV and kind of more accessible in different ways that it perhaps hasn't been, and for young women to consider it as an option. So that's really important. Vicky, do you want to?
The only thing I could add to that is when you're looking at your own collections, you can, if you were to do we've got a small temporary exhibition space, so we can actually feature different athletes, and we could kind of, it's looking for opportunities of diversity within projects you might do, and it might even be a volunteer who wants to do a particular piece of research, and steering and encouraging them to pull out those more diverse stories and to research them and share them, and then you begin to get an acorn, and somebody else might add in some information, and then maybe that will eventually lead to further study. So I think that perhaps our role in museums is to eke out those more diverse stories and objects within our collection and highlight them, to inspire that.
And I think that one of the things that was happening a few years ago is actually that women cricketers were going to Lords and saying, I've got some collection items, and they were being told to go away because they didn't have room to accommodate those, and that's just seems crazy. So I think that one of the things, obviously as a sporting heritage sector, is to be very welcoming and to maybe you have to prioritize your collection materials. I do understand that, but prioritize them in a way that that seeks to diversify them at the same time.
And that would therefore come back to your collections development policy and the need to make sure that acknowledges and highlights the need for diversification. And really that collections policy, certainly if you're an accredited museum, is something that the Arts Council should be picking up on as part of that accreditation process.
Yes, because it means that you're starting to work that into your
absolutely
development policies, and you're reflecting those in your collections, and then that leads on to all the work that you do in exhibitions and so on. So yeah, that's really important. I mean, in the case of Lords, I'm not surprised by that, Raf, because they've, it's only recently they've admitted female members. So I think there's a huge amount of work still to be done when it comes to diversity, definitely. And I think that goes for all areas of museums, as we know at the moment, and heritage. Just picking up on that, on the plan for the women's exhibition, Raf, is there a plan to kind of get it out beyond, obviously you said it'll be in the Lords Museum, but is there a plan to kind of get it out beyond that? Because obviously, only a certain number of people are going to see it there or on a match day, hopefully if we've got cricket next season, etc. So and kind of go beyond the walls of the museum, I would say.
It's a great question, and I think I would love to see that happen. I think at the moment, it came up in the chat earlier that apparently it's going to be open. People can go and visit from November, which I actually wasn't aware of. So that's great. But in terms of my ability to influence it going around, it potentially being a touring exhibition and goes around the country, that would be amazing. I'd love to see that happen. If I can do anything to assist in that, then I definitely would. But I think, like everything, it will probably come down to money. So if I am successful in the application that is going through at the moment, I'm waiting to hear the result of, then some of that money is going to be used to facilitate some events around the exhibition, and hopefully a catalogue and things like that. But at the moment, I think that the budget for the exhibition is being very strictly controlled, because obviously we're in those kind of financial times where cutbacks have to be made, which is unfortunate. But if that could happen, it would be great.
Yeah. Absolutely. That would be really, really good if it could. I've just got another. I'm just conscious we've got sort of the last 5 minutes or so, but I've got another question here. Would you both value Sporting Heritage running partnership webinars and events when it's possible to do so, which help develop partnerships and projects specifically for research? Do you think that's something that you would be able to do, would want to do
Yeah.
to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think it would be great, and BSSH would be really keen to be involved in that, I think.
And
it sounds.
Verity, there was another question going back to the diversity, actually, about from Heather Lomas. We must advertise that our collections aren't just balls and shirts and trophies.
Yes, I was.
And I think that's a really, really good point. You know, there's things within our collections, a whole load of minutes around apartheid and the Paralympics and the arguments and the debates that went on. And it's bringing those things out. And we've also got something really lovely about the journey to Tokyo in '64, which took this torturous route up north to Anchorage and across. It was because it was the Cold War and you couldn't fly over Russia. So there's, you know, that political debate, and those things are often hidden in the minutes and so it's kind of bringing those stories out and doing bits of research around them.
Vicky, can I just say I was really struck. I'm actually really happy to hear you say that one of the things that you were talking about with partnerships was to open up debate. And I think that sometimes as academics, we have a view of the sporting heritage sector that you just want to tell kind of nice, happy, positive stories about your collections. But often there are some quite unedifying or maybe difficult stories to be told about the history of our sports and the heritage of our sports, and that it's important that we do that as well. And I think that academics can really help with that, because we're used to being a bit downbeat about stuff.
Very important, really important.
I would also agree with that. Yeah.
If I say Stoke Mandeville to you, what do most people think of? A lot of people, Jimmy Savile. You know, that's a really difficult story, but it's there and it happened. And, you know, there are things in our collection that go back to that.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, actually, I think a lot of, and this certainly goes for me a couple of years ago on the project I was working on, but the First World War commemorations and people that have done projects and so on over that commemoration period certainly highlighted sporting heritage stories and footballers and cricketers and so on, who were kind of big names in the day, and then had a very different experience when they had to enlist in the army. So I think, there's always kind of more hidden and difficult histories to be shared, and I think it's kind of saying, you know, it's all right to do that, and we should have the confidence to do that, because it can be done in a way that's sensitive and can share those different stories with each other. I'm just looking at the question, just to go back to all history training. So I'm aware that there has just been an all history and sporting heritage joint webinar session recently, but the next one will hopefully be within the next 6 months, and the webinar recording from the recent one will be on the Sporting Heritage YouTube channel soon. So if you did miss that but you're looking for some help, then that might be the place to go. Other people are adding links and various bits of information just following on from the conversation, so we will capture all of that and share that. I'm aware that there's only 3 minutes to go, so unless anyone's got a very quick last question, just want to thank you both. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear from you, and I think it's really important to hear both sides, you know, from the Heritage Museum's point of view and from the academic point of view, and actually how those two can work really well together. So thank you very much to both of you. I will just flag with you all that is our last session for today, but there is a social and quiz, I think, that is being hosted by Hugh Dan McClellan this evening, and that's at 6:30. So the Zoom codes are in your delegate packs. So I hope you can join us a bit later on after a little break. Otherwise, we hope you'll rejoin us tomorrow morning, I think from 9:30, but I haven't got my information to hand, so don't quote me on that one, for another packed day tomorrow. But thank you to everybody who's contributed today, this afternoon, and thanks for bearing with us with the technology. I hope it will go a little bit more smoothly tomorrow, and we'll capture all the information that's been shared, and do continue to tweet and share it in the Twitter sphere. So thank you very much all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.